Again, it was relatively shorter Farbrengen than usual. Farbrengen was over by 3:30. In general, the Farbrengen theme of the entire Farbrengen was about preparing ourselves for Yud Shvat. The Rebbe began right away that Shabbos relates to the entire oncoming week, and usually many decisions we make on Shabbos are to fulfill them during the week, and especially this week when we have something of such a special significance as the inyan of Yud Shvat. Especially this year, that this year we are entering into the 40th year since the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Regarding the inyan of 40 years, we find in the Torah that when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Yidden, and he addressed himself to the generation, to the Doyer Shenichnesu La'aretz, to those Yidden that did enter Eretz Yisrael. And when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to them, it was not full 40 years yet since Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. They were entering the 40th year. And nonetheless, Moshe Rabbeinu was bringing out that throughout all these years, it was V'loi nosan Hashem lachem, the Rebishter did not give you Leiv Lodas V'ayin Lirois Vaznayim Lishmoya. Throughout all these years, you were not able to have the heart to understand and your eyes and ears to really give a proper understanding of everything that has transpired. When the Rebbe has taken Yidden out of Mitzrayim and given them the Torah and everything that happened together, came along together with it. But now that we've already passed 40 years, so the Gemara uses the expression Arboyim Shnin Koyim Inish Adaita da Rabbe. When one comes after 40 years, then he can grasp and have the understanding of what his Rav was really trying to relate to him. Meaning of this is extremely brief. It's an inyan which is discussed at length in Svarim and Chassidus. Means that it comes a certain point when a person, after 40 years, after hearing a Dvar Seichel theory from his Rav and working on it for 40 years, he can come and be koyim adaite da Rabbe, stand on the das of his Rebbe. In other words, his Rebbe still remains his Rav. It does not mean that he comes and has the equal understanding of his Rav. It is not so. But on the other hand, he is koyim. Koyim means state. He begins standing. In other words, this dvar seichel, this seichel dike theory, which he was mekabel from his Rav, after working on it for 40 years, he can come to a level of understanding it and getting much deep, getting into the real in depth of the seichel and coming close to the understanding of the Rav, what the Rav of the dvar seichel, which the Rav tried to relate to the Talmud. And this is exactly what happened when Moshe Rabbeinu related to the Yidden when we entered into the 40th year after all these great inyanim have happened. And the same inyan relate, from here we derive the whole inyan, what it means after 40 years. And if the Rebbe referred to that, we also find in the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he brings out the greatness, the Rabbi and the Frierdiker Rebbe and his father, the greatness of this inyan of 40 years. And he was talking about when the Frierdiker Rebbe took over the leadership from his father, the Nesias. Frierdiker Rebbe was B'nai Yechida, he was the only son. And immediately, as the Rebbe Rashab passed away, so this automatically led to it that the Frierdiker Rebbe accepted the Nesias from the Rebbe Rashab. But and as we find that at all occasions, many occasions, the Frierdiker Rebbe always used to stress that his leadership, his Nesias, is an inyan of continuity from the Nesias of his father, the Rebbe Rashab. So Mamela, getting back to our inyan, now we are entering a Yud Shvat of special significance. And when it comes the Shabbos before, Shabbos Bichlal is an inyan of Aliyah. What is the inyan of Shabbos? Everything on Shabbos has its elevation when it comes on Shabbos. Shabbos is an inyan of aliyah sa'ilamis. Shabbos uplifts and elevates everything. Every Yid, everyone is uplifted on Shabbos. Especially when we're talking about the Shabbos before Yotzeit. And as we know, the minhag is that on the Shabbos before Yotzeit, everyone should have an aliyah. So it's like another inyan of aliyah. Well, what's the pshat in aliyah? When a person's called to aliyah l'teira, it's kishmoi kenu. That means that he is oila, he's being elevated. So when this elevation is taking place on the Shabbos before, which b'chlal the inyan of Shabbos is an inyan of aliyah. And all of these things come together. So it's definitely the opportune time to accept it. Everyone should accept upon themselves hachlotos toivos, good decisions that should be brought down into ma'aseh, that should be brought down into reality. The Rebbe kept on stressing throughout the entire Farbrengen the importance of accepting hachlotos toivos, good decisions regarding Yud Shvat. And he's sure, the Rebbe says, that there are definitely those that have already accepted these hachlotos toivos. And these hachlotos toivos should all be brought down into a reality. And all this comes as a proper preparation for Yud Shvat. Rabbi continued, Bichlal, we are in Parshas Boi, and the contents of Parshas Boi is the inyan of Yitzias Mitzrayim. In other words, the contents of Parshas Boi is the inyan of Geula, because the Geula HaSida is also tied, verbunden with Yitzias Mitzrayim. As the pasuk says, Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflois. That the wonders, the niflois, which the Rebbeinu will do when he will take us out of this Golus, out of the final stage of Golus, will be yet greater than those that were when the Rebbeinu took us out of Mitzrayim. However, what do we see? We see that it is compared to Yitzias Mitzrayim. So the inyan of the Gula Hasidah and in Yitzias Mitzrayim have something in common, that they relate one to another. So Mamela, this Sedra, the contents of this Sedra, is the inyan of Geula. What is the siyum of Parshas Boi? The siyum of Parshas Boi is the parsha of Tefillin. Everything, says the Rebbe, Zashkocha Protis. We just began the new cycle in learning Rambam. And the new cycle of learning Rambam, what is the Rambam? For those that learn 3 Prakim Rambam a day, today we complete the halachas of Tefillin. And in the halachas of Tefillin, it's also the same minyan as the end of this Seder, minyan of Tefillin. What does the Rambam write in the Siyum of Hilchas Tefillin? There the Rambam tells us that harogil b'Tefillin, the one who is used to put on Tefillin, the Rambam says that the reward for that will be an inyan of arichus yomim. Arichus yomim, long life. And here the Rebbe brings out that when we're talking about arichus yomim, it doesn't necessarily mean, in other words, it doesn't just mean to live for long years. That is something in itself. But there's much more than that to it. When we're talking about Yidden, and inyan von arichus yomim, we mean long years, but what kind of years? The length of the years are there right away at the beginning. Was meint das? That means that the days are fully utilized days. It's not just enough to live for long years. Long years is nicht genug. The whole idea in long years is that all these years should be utilized properly. Memela, when they're utilized properly, it doesn't just begin in later years, it begins right now. Right now, these days are full and complete days, that they are yomim shebitchilasei hu arach. Right away from its beginning, it is a long day. It may be compared, the Rebbe always teaches, Pasuk says, Avram zakein, Avram got old, Bo Bayomim, and he came with the days. What's the pshat? Bo Bayomim. Avram Zaken. What does the pasuk add on more? Bo Bayomim. So the Rebbe always explains, Avram just wasn't an old man. Together with it, Bo Bayomim, he came with his days. His days were accomplished days. For every single day of his life, he had an accomplishment. Every minute was utilized. Memela, when a person lives long, and together with it, his long years are utilized years of achievement, years of accomplishment. This is the real, in-depth meaning of Arichas Yomim. Rabbi Rebbe again urged that it's again an opportune time to mention the importance of Limud Rambam. And this is a limud which constantly, Rebbe says, more and more people are joining in. It's nispashet, it's spreading and reaching out to more and more Yidden who are joining in this limud Rambam. Again, Rebbe is getting back, concluding, especially this year. That this year, as already mentioned at previous occasions, it's a Shana Tmima. It's a complete year. Complete year because of the fact that it is a leap year. And it's a leap year, so that's why we have an additional month added on to the year. So Mela, it's such a year, so the entire Avodah that's done during this year has to be an Avodah Tmima. The Avodah also has to be on a level of completeness, on a level of Shleimus, being that this is the whole union of this year. This is a year. That the year is a Tmima, it's a Shana Tmima, and what makes it a Shana Tmima? The fact that an additional month is added on, and as the Rebbe brought out at previous occasions, what's the pshat that this month is added on? Why is this month added on? This month is added on to straighten out between the two calendar years, to straighten out between the Shnas HaChama and the Shnas HaLavona. And Mela, this, what does this show us? This shows us that we can always straighten out. In other words, we can always fill in whatever we have missed. That's the whole union of Shana Muberes. Not only that, when we add on the year, when we add on the month, we are even going a step ahead. Not only are we adding on to, we are not only straightening out the two calendar years, the sun and the moon, but by the end of Shana Tmima, we are already ahead with a few days. That's when we look into the cheshbon, we look into the accounting, I think it comes out the difference between a Shana Chama and a Shnas HaLavona, if I'm not mistaken, is 11 days or so.
13. Yeah, you lose 11 days.
You lose 11 days. So if we have a Shana Tmima, I think it's 11. If you have a Shana Muberes, we have it like 7 times within 19 years. So it always comes out that by the end of the Shana Muberes, we're already a few days ahead into the next couple of years when we will need again a Shana Muberes. So that's the whole Hirah that a Shana Muberes teaches us. So if we are in this year, which is the leap year, and the leap year is called the Shana Tmima, it's a whole and complete year as opposed to other years, because other years we have a month less. So therefore this is the ideal year to stress that the entire union of Avodas Hashem should be done in such a way, in a way of tmimus, in a way of ganzkeit, whole and complete. And here the Rebbe was mekasher again. He was talking how lo asid lovi, when Mashiach will come, then we will have nisim, niflois, wonders from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, however, we are living in an era of ein bal hanes makir bin nisoy. The person who nisim are performed to, but he does not realize, he's not makir, does not recognize that the Rebbe is doing nisim. And the Rebbe was this mekasher, and we know that Yidden in Golis, Chazal used the expression, it is a kifsa achas, it is like a little sheep, in ayin ze'evim, amongst 70 wolves, or there's another expression, amongst 70 lions. This is what Yidden are compared to. But nonetheless, the Rebbe made nisim, and amongst these aroyos, amongst these lions, and amongst these wolves, there are such that are not doing any harm to Yidden. And on the contrary, not only are they not doing any harm to Yidden, but they are helping out Yidden in any way possible. In any way possible, they are trying to make it easier and more pleasant so that Yidden should be able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. Obviously, the Rebbe was referring to when Yidden are living in countries like the United States or similar countries where not only is there no interference with the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, but more than that, government comes across and makes it in any way possible and easy that Yidden should be able to fulfill and be committed to Torah mitzvahs. The Rebbe continued that being that it is before Yud Shvat, there is something else which he would like to refer to, something which it seems was not understood clearly. So the Rebbe referred to it. The Rebbe used the expression in Yiddish, "mot gegreist." In other words, an error was made in it. And it has to be clarified. The Rebbe is referring, says there are many inyanim. When a question arises by a person and he does not know what to do, there are many people that instead of searching for an answer themselves, they immediately run and ask somebody else. People are not utilizing their own kishroinos, their own talents which the Rebbe has given them, so that he should be able to look into it himself, and thereby he will answer it himself. He will answer the question himself. But people are not doing that. The Rebbe did not tie choice, but obviously it's pretty obvious. That's what it seems. The Rebbe was simply referring Ugabe himself. The attitude of people is, some have an attitude that immediately, as soon as they have some sort of a question, some sort of a doubt, to ask the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, what could this be compared to? What could this be in a parallel? He says, when there's a child that has a question in a pasuk chumash, so the child can have the opportunity and go to a chumash teacher, and the chumash teacher will solve it for him. What will be when the child's father will say, nah, I don't want my boy to ask this question to a teacher who's teaching chumash. I will take my son to the Rosh Yeshiva, whose inyan is to relate Talmidim to Big Talmidim. He relates to Big Talmidim, Gemara and Tosfos and Poskim. And he will take his son to this Rosh Yeshiva, so that this Rosh Yeshiva will answer the child the question that the child has in the Pasuk Chumash. So, from several ways, this is wrong. First of all, it's not the Rosh Yeshiva's inyan to, in other words, everyone has his expertise. This is how we see it. Rosh Yeshiva's inyan is not to be involved in answering questions of Chumash. It's not his field. It's not his expertise. What is he fully occupied with? Relating Gemara and Tosfos and Rishonim, talking on this inyan. It says, Ben Chamish Lemikchas, the Rebbe's expression, 5-year-old child. And then we come to Ben Esel Mishnah, when Mishnah tells us that when a child becomes 10, he learns Mishnah. Here the Rebbe says, though nowadays, this is already not the practice. Nowadays we begin learning with a child Mishnah at a much earlier age. And even Gemara, we teach children at an early age. And Chassidus, we also teach children to an early age, as we did generations ago. And in fact, it's seen today the advantage of teaching all these things to children at an early age. But getting back to our inyan, this was something like, kind of like indirect. But getting back to our inyan, it is wrong when the question of Chumash is addressed to the person who is addressed to the person whose inyan is to answer pshat in a hard piece of Gemara. His inyan is to be a Rosh Yeshiva. And besides, he will definitely have to wait a long time until he will get the answer from this Rosh Yeshiva. So he's also wasting time. And instead of approaching the Rebbe who's teaching Chumash, and then the child will have an answer right away, and will understand properly the question of Chumash. Though we are not underestimating the question may be a very good one, a very proper one. And the same the Rebbe says when we have our questions, there are those that would not get involved, or would not take the time to search for an answer themselves, or go ahead and discuss it with their Rav, Asei Rav, but immediately their attitude is to write, to turn to others, and write and ask questions on these type of inyanim. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen again with reminding us on inyanim which we are to do for Yud Shvat. The Rebbe referred to the Maimer Basi Lagani, which, as we know, this is the Maimer which the Frierdiker Rebbe issued before he was Nifter. Frierdiker Rebbe issued this Maimer, this beginning, to be learned on the Shabbos of Yud Shvat, Tafshin Yud, the Shabbos which he was Nifter, because Yud Shvat is also the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivke, the Rebbe Marash's Rebbetzin. Her Yortzeit is Yud Shvat, and the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother's Yortzeit is Yud Gimel Shvat. So it was for these dates that in the year Tafshin Yud, he says 39 years ago, that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out the Maimer of that begins with Basi Lagani. This Maimer
has 20 prokim, 20 oisies. And since the first year, Tavshin Yud Aleph, when the Rebbe Zalman began saying Chassidus, began saying Mamorim, the Rebbe has established a minhag that every year the Maimah Chassidus of Yud Shvat begins with Basi Legani, but every year he explains at length the following ois, the following perik of the Maimah. So if the first year he explained at length the first perik, and the second year the second perik, and so forth, until after 20 years, 20th year, explained at length the last perik of the Maimah Basi Legani. Now we are already towards the end of the second cycle of learning Basi Legani. So the Rebbe says that this year, when we will learn Basi Legani, B'chlal it's advisable on the day of Yortzeit to learn the Torah of the Baal HaYilula. It's B'chlal an advisable inyan. There's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe somewhere in the Sikha that when on the day of Yortzeit of a tzaddik we learn his Torah, Frierdiker Rebbe says it's as we have given a pidyon nefesh to the tzaddik on that day. So B'chlal it's advisable to learn the Teirosei Shel Baal HaHilula, and particularly to Bizach Mishtadl, we should try to learn the Maimah Basi Legani, and in the Maimah Basi Legani taka the 19th Perik, which this is the Perik that, in order of sequence, in order of Seder, has a shaykhis to this year. It also says that in Kunteres Heicholzu, the Rebbe Rashab brings out that in Yonim which are done publicly are much more effective. And B'chal in Gemara we also find, Gemara says, the Gemara very much praises when a person learns B'chavrusa, when he learns together with somebody else, as opposed to when he learns himself, when he learns individually. So Mamela, it's extremely advisable, if at all possible, that this learning should be not on an individual basis, but to learn with somebody else, learning with somebody else, until if at all possible to learn with a minyan, with Asara Yisrael. The Rebbe also referred to the minig which the Rebbe writes in the Menhagim of Yud Shvat, that on this day of Yud Shvat also somebody should go to the Amid, somebody amongst the Tzibur, amongst the Kahal, should be chosen and go to the Amid and daven all tefillas by the Amid, also for this day of Yortzeit. And the Rebbe also spoke about the importance of giving tzedakah on this day of Yortzeit. Rebbe, at the very end, mentioned also regarding the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The first name, the Rebbe always teaches, the famous teacher at Tzemach Tzedek, regarding the name Yosef. He referred to it today again, that what's the union of Yosef? Yosef means to increase, to be Moisef. When Rachel gave birth to Yosef, what did she say? Yosef Hashem li bein acher. She asked that the Rebbe should give her another child. This was her first child, so she asked from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that she be blessed with another child. So what does the Tzemach Tzedek teach? That what is the Avodah V'Yid? The Avodah V'Yid is to reach out to one who is defined as an acher. Acher means the andere, the one over there. In other words, he does not have an obvious Verbundenkeit, an obvious tie with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what is the Avodah? To see to it that this Acher becomes close and that it's obvious and seen that he too is a Bain, is a son to the Eibishter. Every Yid is a son to the Eibishter. But to show, it should be obviously seen that he's a son to the Eibishter. Yosef Hashem li, on to Hashem, Bain, that it should be a ben, should be a zum, the one who until now was an acher, and him too it should be noticeable that he's a ben. And together with this comes the second name of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The second name of the Frierdiker Rebbe was Yitzchak. What is Yitzchak? Yitzchak is Moloshen Tzchoik, laughter. What's the pshat laughter? Laughter is simcha. In other words, the Rebbe is stressing that this Avodah should be done metoich simcha. When this Avodah is done metoich simcha, then definitely we're much more successful when we do the Avodah metoich simcha. Rebbe also referred to it that next Shabbos will be Tu B'Shvat. And in as much as there's a minig Yisrael that we eat fruit on that day, and there's definitely something meaningful in it, but Bechlal, Ki Adam Eitz Asada, a man is compared to a tree, and a Talmud Chacham is compared to a fruit-bearing tree. So we see that there's definitely something, a deeper meaning, a pneumistic meaning in the entire union of celebrating Tu B'Shvat by eating fruit. And in as much as usually until now the Rebbe says this has been something which people have practiced it, however, it has been kind of like a family practice. We've never organized things in a format of Roivam Hadras Melech with many participants and to eat the fruits of Tu B'Shvat. It's usually something which we do it at home or in a closed environment. The Rebbe is urging that in addition to doing it at home, it should also be done publicly. In other words, celebrations of Tu B'Shvat should be arranged, and all over, here as well, the Rebbe says, and to be utilized properly, to see to it that the message of Tu B'Shvat, the contents of Tu B'Shvat is brought out, and involve more and yet more people, and then comes into the category of Roivam Hadras Melech.